When a ne'er-do-well from the north of England was stumbling through a shambling, directionless life, it was pretty normal by the standards and economic class of his peers. But beneath the surface, there lay a seething blackness trying to emerge. When it had incubated for long enough in dark fantasies, it exploded into bloody reality that would have the north of England and indeed the whole of the UK reeling, and see him become, for a time, Britain's most wanted man. This is Murderer of Crows.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come not and say you're old. A sudden chill.
We'll delve into the backstory of a man called Mark Hobson shortly. But first, take a look at this little cherub. Have a long look at this face and think about what sort of person he may be. Have you got that thought? Good. Now have a think. Based on appearance alone, where do you think you would put him on Dr. Steve's patented wheel of arseholeness? We have bit of an arsehole, then we have arsehole, where we find fully fledged arseholes, but no more offensive than that. You know, if it's a bit further along, a bit more of an arsehole, then you would have major arsehole, where just arsehole doesn't feel quite enough in terms of the level of arseholeness. And finally, complete and utter arsehole, which is the pinnacle of arseholeness and features the likes of Piers Morgan. So let's give the wheel a spin and see where Mark Hobson sits on this first impression. Ding ding ding! Rather unsurprisingly, the majority of you would put him in complete and utter arsehole. And you'd be dead right. And if you can't quite put your finger on why, let's just find out a bit more about him and how he wasn't always an arsehole before we discuss the events of July 2004. First of all, and somewhat strangely, we have a relatively normal and sedate childhood. Born into a typical mining family to Peter and Sandra, Peter had worked his way up into a management position at Walton Colliery, but unfortunately the coal industry in the UK was dying on its arse when Mark was a nipper. So one imagines a level of uncertainty within the household, and this culminated in the Walton Colliery closing in 1982, and the family, which was Peter, Sandra, Mark, and his two sisters, Melanie and Leslie, they had to move to Selby. But despite all this, Hobson's childhood showed nothing of the hallmarks from the MacDonald triad that could potentially hint at the darkness that would be in his future. He was schooled at Heathview Primary School in Wakefield, and later his schooling was split between Stainer High School and then Britton High School in Selby. Indeed, one teacher said that as a pupil he was very well behaved, but also remarked that he was so average he was almost anonymous. Hardly a glowing tribute, but still not indicative of a baby Lucifer. We then move on to early adulthood, which was, strangely again, seemingly serene and, dare I say, picture book. He moved in with his childhood sweetheart Kay in 1991 when he was 21, and she had 2 children from a previous relationship, and such was the idyllic situation that the pair found themselves in that after the birth of their daughter in 1993 they married. He had a couple of different jobs at this time, around including gardening, with Kay, his wife, saying that at the time he was the perfect husband. In 1998 he began working as a nightclub doorman at Cannes nightclub in Selby. In view of what happened soon after, I can only guess that this job introduced him to the seductive twin worlds of alcohol and illicit substances, which we know is a slippery slope. When I say soon after, I mean within a couple of months of him becoming a nightclub doorman, he walked out on his family on New Year's Day 1999 without giving any reason. Kay saw a rapid downward spiral with Hobson from this point on. She said he just didn't want married life anymore. It was bizarre. I couldn't believe it. He never drank when we were married, but now he got out of his face. For anyone who doesn't know, that just means extremely drunk. He became like a zombie, and his life went completely off the rails. When things change in someone's life, and this coincides with a spike in using mind-altering substances, and I include alcohol in that, one can't help but see a link between the substances and the presenting behaviour. Addiction is a demanding mistress that cares for nothing but itself. I often personify addiction because it can display distinctly human traits in bending people to its will. Now, I'm not saying Hobson was either blameless or choiceless in the later events. Far from it. And he is a vile and deplorable human being for going down the roads he chooses to go down. However, there is such a marked departure from his previous behaviour and presentation that you absolutely have to consider it a major factor in his life and mental health seemingly degenerating in the way it seemed to. Not an excuse, but certainly a factor to be considered. By 2002, Hobson was now working as a bin man. It's around this time we see an increase in criminal behaviour. But as is all too common, controversial leniency in sentencing would end up having tragic repercussions. After an altercation with a man called William Brace in Selby in the March of that year, Hobson stabbed him 5 times in the arm and chest with a butterfly knife. This was a daytime attack in front of people who were just out shopping locally. And it happened after Brace had confronted Hobson over the latter allegedly sleeping with Brace's girlfriend. Brace suffered a punctured lung, and Hobson was charged with wounding with intent. He appeared in York Crown Court in February 2003. What do you reckon he was sentenced for this horrific and malicious crime? I'll give you a few seconds to ponder and deliberate. I hinted that there was leniency, and for this horrific knife attack that you could make an argument also amounted to attempted murder, Hobson received from Judge Scott Wolstenholme community service. Jesus Christ on a bicycle. Community service. Safe to say, William Brace's mother Margaret wasn't exactly impressed, saying there was talk of Mark getting 4 or 5 years, but the sentence he got was disgusting and made me very angry. Well, remarkable restraint there, Margaret. It boils my piss just thinking about it now. But it was what it was, and Hobson walked free from court to continue his downward spiral. By 2003, he was living with his girlfriend Claire Sanderson in a flat on Millfield Drive in Campbellsforth. As with most relationships built on foundations of substance dependency, either on one side or on both, their lives were fraught with arguments, discontent, and violence. Hobson's anger and impulsiveness continued to grow and ferment within him. Locals in the area describe having to step in to separate the two when things would escalate. In one incident, Hobson was found in the flat punching Claire in the face while holding her by the neck. In another incident, I kid you not, he was found standing on her chest with a 12-inch butcher's knife to her throat. But Claire was smitten with Hobson. I mean, in fairness, he was quite the catch. The eyes, the charm, the unmitigated violence. What's not to love? But it seems he was less enamoured with her, as she told a fellow binman that he had chosen the wrong sister, referring to Claire's twin sister Diane. In fact, he made intimations that he intended to have Diane at some point. What a sweet, sweet man. By July, scribbled notes and lists found at the flat indicated his seething discontent. He had written Diane's name alongside the delightful phrase, "use and abuse at will." Clearly something had to give. On Sunday, the 11th of June 2004, all seemed well for Claire and Hobson, with the pair spending the evening at the Comus Inn in Campbellforth. However, after returning to the flat, Hobson hit her 17 times in the head with a hammer. If this had been a crime of passion, what happened in the days that followed can only be described as chillingly calculated. He wrapped her body in a plastic bag and put it in the bedroom. He wrote a list of things he needed, including big bin liners, tape, cable ties, fly spray, and air freshener. He called Claire's parents with excuses why she hadn't been in touch. He was trying to create an air of normalcy rather than fleeing, because he wasn't done yet. By Saturday the 17th of July, he told Claire's twin sister Diane that Claire had glandular fever and was asking to see her. So Diane jumped into her little blue Peugeot at 7:20 p.m. and was never seen alive again. Well, except by Hobson. After luring her into the flat, the exact timeline of events is unclear. What is clear is that she was hogtied. She seems to have been tortured with a razor and with scissors. She was sexually assaulted. Her nipple was bitten off and, according to later reports, may have been eaten by Hobson. And she was found to have been beaten with a hammer, although the official cause of death was actually strangulation. Many run-of-the-mill standard murderers would have fled at this point, but rather than run, Hobson, who as an addict was a habitual liar, took a more measured approach to the fact that he now had two dead sisters in his bedroom, one of whom had been deceased for several days. This approach was aided by the fact that Diane Sanderson's boyfriend, Ian Harrison, was actually an old friend of Hobson's. So when Harrison called Diane's mobile after she'd been gone for some time, Hobson quickly concocted a story about how the twins' father, George, had suffered a heart attack, thereby accounting for the absence of both Diane and Claire. But being more brazen still, Hobson then went on to meet Harrison at the Cricketers' Arms in Selby. So within a couple of hours of Diane's brutal murder, Hobson was having drinky poos with her boyfriend. Do you find that hard to believe? Well, hold on to your socks, because what Hobson did next absolutely stunned me. He invited Harrison back to the flat. You know, the flat where he had 2 dead women, one of whom was Harrison's girlfriend. That flat. When Harrison mentioned the foul smell in the flat, Hobson blamed the drains. Well, they always do, don't they? When Harrison saw blood on the sofa, Hobson didn't miss a beat, and like a Neanderthal, albeit a very cunning one, blamed Claire's women's problems. A disgusting notion, but one that was seemingly plausible in Hobson's world. Apparently placated, Harrison left, and it was only when he went to the Sanderson home at 7 a.m. the next morning and the apparently critically ill George Sanderson answered the door, very much uncardiacally arrested, that the alarm was raised. And although the horrific scene at the flat was discovered, Hobson was not at the flat. After Harrison had left the flat the previous night, Hobson had run to his mother's home nearby, and he had another fantastical tale to tell. He told his mother that Claire and Diane had been in a car accident in York, and he needed to get to the hospital in York to see them. It must have been a convincing performance, because his mother immediately drove him the 15 miles to the hospital in York at 2 a.m. Hobson continued this charade by then going into the hospital for a few minutes and then returning to tell his mother that both girls were still being treated. Assuming that he would travel back with the Sanderson family, Hobson's mother left him to wait at the girl's bedside, not knowing that the bed both girls were in was 15 miles away back in Selby. After his mother left, Hobson travelled seemingly randomly the 3 miles to Strensholm, and in a further what seems random choice, he chose to break into a bungalow. This bungalow was home to James and Joan Britton, both of whom were 80-year-old pensioners, and both of whom had significant health issues and were very frail. Neighbours of the Brittons, knowing their vulnerability, would check on the couple frequently. But when they called to see them at 11:15 a.m. on Sunday the 18th of July, they were met with a horrific scene. They found Joan Britton dead in the hallway, having been stabbed in the back so viciously that the handle of the weapon had broken off. She had also been beaten around the head. James Britton was found dead in the living room with similar injuries. Now, when the alarm was raised, there was nothing to connect this incident with the crime scene at Selby. But by the time fingerprints at the Britton home linked the murders to the Selby killings, Hobson was long gone. There followed a nationwide manhunt, and at this time Hobson was considered the most wanted man in the UK, and the widespread media coverage led to over 1,800 sightings over the subsequent days. Sightings that went as far afield as California and New Zealand. But the truth was far more mundane. And on the 25th of July, Hobson emerged from hiding in a field just 5 miles from Strensall to buy water, matches and cigarette papers from a petrol station. Due to the national coverage of the murders, the attendant recognised Hobson and alerted the police. When the police arrived, Hobson did attempt superficially slashing himself, but ultimately went quietly, and even thanked the police for their respectful approach to him. As he was led away, Hobson said enigmatically and somewhat redundantly, "I'm a fucking murderer, aren't I?" Hobson killed 4 people over a short period of time, effectively making him a spree killer. He pled guilty to all 4 murders at his trial in April 2005. Now, each murder was ostensibly represented with an individual life sentence, but Hobson was ultimately one of the few criminals made subject to a whole life tariff, effectively the harshest punishment currently available in the legal system. He appealed on the grounds that an early guilty plea should have merited a lighter sentence, but Lord Phillips, hearing the appeal, agreed with the original imposition of a whole life tariff because the murders had been so horrific. Hobson is serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield in West Yorkshire. There is one further event of note in Hobson's story, and it is that shortly before his appeal was heard, Hobson had been in solitary confinement for 3 months. And the reason he'd been in solitary was that he attacked and used boiling water to scald Ian Huntley, the infamous child killer, and another top scorer on my wheel of arseholeness. Some may praise Hobson's actions, but I just consider this whole incident a footnote, like a Lord of the Flies situation for the dregs and detritus of society from the shallow end of the gene pool. These people can kill each other if they want. I am not going to lose any sleep over it. But I thought it was worth mentioning as part of Hobson's story. Now, Hobson himself has tried to blame alcohol for his offending, but his type will always try to shift the blame elsewhere. Substance misuse was undeniably a major factor in his downward spiral, but he ultimately made the decision to take his misery and anger and seething resentment out on those around him. And his choices were what landed him with a whole life tariff. I prefer to focus on the innocent lives needlessly taken by a man who lost control. This video is dedicated to Claire and Diane Sanderson, and to James and Joan Britton, and indeed to the Sanderson and Britton families and friends as a whole, who each lost two wonderful souls. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that